The officer's voice cut across the parking lot like a blade. "Hey, step away from the bike." Special Agent Renee Carter didn't flinch. She didn't spin around. She turned slowly, with the measured calm of someone who had spent 2 decades in rooms where the wrong reaction could get people killed. She looked at the man walking toward her, blue uniform, hand already drifting toward his belt, jaw set like he'd already written the ending to this story before it had even started, and she made an immediate assessment. The way she always did. The way she had been trained to. He was certain. That was the most dangerous thing about him. It was a Tuesday, 7:43 in the evening. The quick-stop gas station on Mercer Boulevard was half-lit under a row of flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like something trapped. Renee had pulled off the highway 20 minutes earlier than usual because she was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that builds up across years of carrying things quietly. She'd had a long week, a brutal case review that morning. A 3-hour debrief in the afternoon that left her sitting in her car in the bureau parking garage for 10 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. All she wanted was a full tank, a bottle of water, and the last 40 minutes of highway between her and her front door. She had been standing at pump 7, card already swiped, nozzle already in the tank when the cruiser rolled in. "I said step away from the bike." His voice was louder this time, performing now, making sure the small Tuesday night audience at the quick stop understood who held the authority in this parking lot. The man at pump 5 looked up. The woman loading her trunk 2 spaces down slowed her movements. Through the smudged glass of the station's front window, the attendant, a teenager in a green polo shirt, pressed closer to the counter. And somewhere behind Renee, she heard the small, specific sound of a phone camera unlocking. Good, she thought. Keep recording. She pulled the nozzle out of the tank, set it carefully back on the pump, turned to face him fully. Officer Dale Pruitt had been with the Mercer City Police Department for 11 years. He was the kind of cop who had never had a reason to question his own instincts because his instincts had never been seriously challenged. He stood 6'2", broad through the shoulders, with the particular confidence of a man who was used to people adjusting themselves around him rather than the other way around. He had called in a possible stolen vehicle report 14 minutes ago, a black and chrome motorcycle matching the description of a bike reported missing from a dealership 2 counties over. He had found what he was looking for, or so he believed. "This your bike?" he asked. His tone said the question was a formality. "It is," Renee said. "You got registration?" "I do." "Let me see it." She held his gaze for exactly 1 second before she moved, not because she was challenging him, but because she needed him to understand from the very first exchange that she was not afraid of him. Fear was the first thing men like this reached for. If they couldn't find it in your eyes, it disrupted the script they were running. She reached into the small storage compartment on the side of the bike, retrieved the registration and insurance card, both in her name, both current, both exactly what they were supposed to be, and held them out. He took them, studied them. His eyes moved over the documents in the slow, deliberate way of someone searching for a problem rather than reading for information. "This address current?" "Yes." "You live on Ashwood Drive?" "I do." "That's a nice neighborhood," he said. The way he said it was not a compliment. Renee had heard that particular sentence, or versions of it, more times than she could count. It was one of the oldest moves in a very old playbook, the implication wrapped in the observation. The doubt dressed up as small talk. She let it land without reaction, because reacting to it was exactly what he wanted. Every second she kept her composure was a second he spent revealing himself. "Can I ask what prompted this stop?" she said. "Got a report of a stolen motorcycle. Black and chrome, this make and model, spotted in this area. And you ran the plates before you approached me." Something shifted in his expression. A brief tightening. Because the answer was no, he hadn't run the plates. He had seen what he expected to see and walked toward it. She could tell from the half-second delay before he answered. I'm running them now. You approached me and made a public accusation before running the plates, she said. Still calm, still level, not a question. A fact stated plainly for the recording. Ma'am, I need you to calm down. I am calm, she said. And she was. Completely, surgically calm. I'd like you to note that I am calm, that I have complied with every request, that I have provided valid documentation, and that you have not yet run the plates on a vehicle you publicly accused me of stealing. The man at pump 5 had stopped pretending to pump gas. The woman near the trunk had her phone out now too. Prout felt the shift, felt the parking lot tilting away from him slightly, and it made him double down the way men like him always doubled down when they felt control slipping. Step to the back of the vehicle, he said. I need to verify the VIN. You can verify the VIN from where you're standing, Renee said. You don't need me to move. Step to the back of the vehicle, ma'am. I won't ask again. She looked at him. She measured the moment. And then she made a decision not out of compliance, but out of strategy. She took 2 steps back, because what she was about to do next required him to be close enough to see it clearly, and she needed his reaction captured on every camera in that parking lot. I'm going to reach inside my jacket, she said, loudly and clearly. I am reaching inside my jacket now. Prout's hand moved to his weapon. Slowly, he said, and his voice had changed, tighter, higher, the performance of authority cracking under something closer to actual alarm. Slowly, she agreed. Her hand came out of her jacket. In it was a badge. Black leather case, gold shield, the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation catching the flickering fluorescent light and throwing it back across the parking lot like a verdict. Special Agent Renee Carter, she said. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Badge number 2241. I have been a federal agent for 22 years. This motorcycle has been registered in my name for 4 years. And you, she held the badge steady, held his gaze steady, held everything absolutely still, have just accused me of stealing it in front of witnesses and at least 2 active recordings. The parking lot went silent in a way that felt physical. Dale Prout stared at the badge. He stared at her. He looked back at the badge. His hand had moved away from his weapon without him seeming to notice he'd done it. The certainty that had carried him across that parking lot, that bone-deep, never-questioned certainty, was gone. In its place was something she had seen on other faces in other high-pressure moments over 22 years. The specific expression of a man realizing in real time that he has made a catastrophic mistake. She gave him no exit ramp. She didn't soften it. She didn't reassure him. She simply stood there with the badge and let the silence do what silence does when it follows something that cannot be taken back. He started. Your badge number, she said. He gave it to her. She repeated it out loud for the recordings. Thank you, she said. And she put her credentials away, picked up the nozzle, finished filling her tank, replaced the cap, and walked into the station to buy a bottle of water. She was in there for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. When she came out, Prout was still standing in the same spot, like the ground had shifted under him, and he hadn't figured out yet how to walk on it. She got on her motorcycle. She started the engine. She rode out of that parking lot without looking back. The recording was online before she hit the highway. But here's what that recording didn't show. Here's what no one watching the clip on their phone the next morning, laughing, gasping, sharing it with the caption, "She ate him alive," could see. Here's what you need to understand before this story goes where it's going, because where it's going is deeper than a parking lot, wider than one officer's bad Tuesday, and heavier than a badge can carry. Renee Carter didn't become an FBI agent by accident. She didn't walk out of that gas station and into the headlines because she was lucky. She got there the way she got everywhere, through 22 years of doing something that the system she worked inside made harder for her than it needed to be, every single step of the way. And if you want to understand what really happened at that gas station, not the 2-minute version, not the viral clip, not the headline, then you need to go back, all the way back, To a girl in a city that taught her early what the law was, who it was for, and what it cost to believe in it anyway. Stay with this story, because what happened before that parking lot is the only thing that makes what happened in it make any sense. And what happens after it, what she does with it, what it costs, what it changes, is the part that no one is talking about. Don't go anywhere. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this is the kind of story that deserves to be told all the way to the end. Drop a comment below and tell us, when she pulled out that badge, what did you feel? Because what you felt in that moment is exactly what this story is about. Renee Carter grew up on Delmont Street in the kind of neighborhood that city planners drew their boundaries around rather than through. It was a community that existed in the margins of a mid-sized American city, not invisible exactly, but overlooked in the particular way that places get overlooked when the people who make decisions about them don't have to live in them. The houses were small and close together. The corner store stayed open late. The church on the end of the block was the loudest and most alive building in a 4-street radius every Sunday morning, and Miss Patricia from number 42 would leave her door unlocked so the neighborhood kids could come in after school and sit at her kitchen table until their parents got home from work. It was not a bad place to grow up. It was a complicated one. Renee was 7 years old the first time she watched a police car pull up outside her house. Her father was in the front yard, a quiet, careful man named Joseph Carter who worked double shifts at a packaging plant and spent his weekends teaching Renee and her younger brother Marcus how to play chess on the porch. He was doing nothing. He was standing in his own front yard in the early evening, talking to their neighbor Mr. Ellis about something Renee couldn't hear from the window. 2 officers got out of the car. They approached her father with a particular energy, not hostile exactly, but loaded, the way a question can be loaded before it's even asked. Renee watched from the window. She watched her father's posture change, not from guilt. She understood even at 7, but from something worse than guilt. From the practiced, learned adjustment of a man who had been taught from boyhood that the wrong movement, the wrong tone, the wrong reaction could turn a conversation into something neither party would recover from. She watched him become smaller than he was. She watched Mr. Ellis take a quiet step back. She watched the whole thing resolve, no arrest, no confrontation, just 2 officers deciding after a few minutes that there was nothing here for them. And she watched her father stand in the yard after the car pulled away, alone, his shoulders carrying something that hadn't been there before. She never forgot his face in that moment. She would think about it 22 years later, standing at a gas station pump with a badge in her hand, and understand for the first time that she had spent her entire career trying to make sure no one ever had to make themselves smaller than they were because something in a uniform had decided to walk toward them. She was not a perfect student. She was a driven one. The difference mattered to her teachers because driven students ask questions that comfortable students don't, and Renee's questions had a way of arriving at the center of things faster than the lesson plan anticipated. She was interested in how systems worked, not just the mechanics of them but the logic underneath, the assumptions baked into the foundations that everyone had agreed to stop examining. She read voraciously. History, law, biography. She was 16 when she first read about the civil rights era wiretapping programs, about the ways the Bureau had been used as a weapon against the very communities it was supposed to protect. She sat with that for a long time. She didn't look away from it. She filed it somewhere deep and let it become part of the architecture of what she was building toward. Because even then, even knowing what she knew, even having watched her father in that front yard, she believed in the possibility of something better. Not naively, not without evidence of how hard the distance was between what institutions claimed to be and what they actually were, but with a particular kind of stubborn, clear-eyed faith that the only way to close that distance was to get inside the machine and work on it from there. Her mother called it determination. Her brother Marcus called it stubbornness. Her high school guidance counselor, a tired man named Mr. Breckenridge who had been talking students out of ambition for so long it had become reflex, told her that federal law enforcement was extremely competitive, and that she should think about realistic alternatives. She thanked him politely and signed up for every law and criminal justice course her school offered. She got into college on a full academic scholarship. She was the first person in her immediate family to go. The night before she left, her father sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where they had played chess on rainy Saturdays, and he said something she carried with her for the rest of her life. "You're going to walk into rooms," he said, "where people are going to decide what you are before you open your mouth, and you're going to have two choices every time. You can spend your energy fighting what they decided, or you can spend it proving something better." He paused. He looked at his hands. "I spent a lot of years doing the first one. It's expensive, Renee. It costs more than it gives back." She nodded. She understood. But she also knew and didn't say, because some things between parents and children live in the space between what's said and what's meant, that she intended to do both. That she had figured out a way to prove something better that was also, quietly and continuously, a fight. She graduated with honors. She went back to her neighborhood for one summer. She worked. She saved. She applied to the FBI. The acceptance letter arrived on a Wednesday morning in October. Her mother cried. Her father didn't, but his hands shook slightly when he held the letter, and Renee pretended not to notice because some moments are too large for witnesses. Quantico was a different kind of test than anything she had prepared for, not because the training was beyond her. It wasn't. She was physically prepared, intellectually prepared, more prepared in most measurable ways than candidates who had been groomed for this path since undergraduate. The test at Quantico wasn't capability. It was belonging. It was the daily, grinding, low-frequency question of whether the institution would ever fully accept that she was exactly what she presented herself to be. She was one of 4 black women in her training cohort. They found each other quickly, not out of separatism, but out of the instinctive gravity that pulls people together when they are navigating the same invisible current in an unfamiliar water. They studied together. They pushed each other. On the nights when the weight of it pressed down, the subtle dismissals, the double standards wrapped in procedural language, the moments where she had to decide whether to name what was happening or absorb it and keep moving, they sat together and talked with the brutal honesty that comes from being tired of translating yourself for people who aren't trying to understand. There was an instructor named Hargrove, a former field agent, 23 years in, the kind of man who wore his experience like armor and mistook confidence in himself for objectivity about others. He ran tactical decision exercises, high-pressure simulations, where trainees had to make fast calls with incomplete information. Renee was consistently among the top performers. Hargrove consistently found reasons to qualify her results. "Good instinct," he told her once, after she'd made a call that 3 of her classmates had gotten wrong. "But you hesitated." "I didn't hesitate," she said. "I assessed." "Looked like hesitation to me." She looked at him steadily. "How long did I take?" He checked his stopwatch. He didn't answer. "How long did Mitchell take on the same scenario last week?" she asked. Mitchell was her classmate. He was also wrong. He had also been told his instincts were strong. Hargrove moved on to the next trainee. Renee filed the exchange in the same place she filed everything, not as grievance, but as data. Information about the environment she was operating in. Knowledge she would need. She graduated in the top 5% of her cohort. Hargrove shook her hand at the ceremony with something in his face that might have been respect if it had arrived a little earlier and cost him a little less. Her first field assignment was a financial crimes unit in a mid-Atlantic field office. She was 26 years old. New badge, new gun. The specific alertness of someone who knows they are being watched and has decided to give the watchers something worth seeing. She made her first significant contribution to an active case within 8 weeks. A thread in a wire fraud investigation that 3 senior agents had missed because they were looking at the money, and she was looking at the people moving it. Her supervisor, a compact, methodical woman named Agent Sandra Ose, who had been navigating the same currents for 15 years longer, called her into the office afterward. "Good catch," Osai said. "Thank you." "They're going to notice you now," Osai said. "Both kinds of noticing. You understand what I mean." Renee understood exactly what she meant. The noticing that came from results was the easy kind. The noticing that came from being a black woman who got results in rooms that had not historically made space for that kind came with its own complications. People who should have been allies becoming quietly competitive. People who had ignored her suddenly paying close attention, looking for the error that would let them recalibrate. The particular exhaustion of performing excellence in an environment that treated your excellence as a surprise. She understood, she prepared herself accordingly, and then she went back to work. Over the next several years, she built a record that made arguments unnecessary. She was transferred to a violent crimes unit and distinguished herself in 3 consecutive major investigations. She spent a year in a joint task force operation that she still cannot discuss in detail due to classification. She was promoted, then promoted again. She became the kind of agent that younger agents were told to watch and learn from, not officially, not in any training manual, but in the way that real knowledge passes through institutions, person to person, in hallway conversations and quiet recommendations. She was good at her job. She was exceptional at it. She had spent 22 years building something that she was proud of, something that had cost her and meant something and changed things in ways large and small that she knew about and ways she would never know about. And none of it, not 1 year of it, not one commendation, not one closed case, not one life made safer, had been visible to Dale Prute when he looked across a gas station parking lot and saw a black woman on a motorcycle. That's the part the 2-minute clip doesn't hold. That's the weight underneath the badge reveal that you can't feel unless you know what came before it. The clip shows the ending. This is the beginning. And the middle is where everything that matters actually happened. Because what Renee did after that parking lot wasn't just survive it. It wasn't just go viral and give morning shows something to run for a news cycle. What she did after it is the reason this story is worth telling all the way to the end. And we're getting there. But first, you need to know what Dale Prute did when he got back in his cruiser that night, what his department did when the video started climbing, and what the woman who had just ridden away from him was doing while the world caught up to what she had already known for 22 years. We're just getting to the center of this thing. Stay with it. If this story is hitting the way it should, go ahead and subscribe. We tell stories like this every week, the kind that go deeper than the headline. And drop a comment below. Do you think Renee should have said more in that parking lot, or was her silence the most powerful thing she could have done? Tell us what you think. Dale Prute sat in his cruiser for 11 minutes after Renee rode away. He didn't call it in immediately. He didn't reach for his radio. He didn't do any of the procedural things that 11 years of training had made automatic, because the part of his brain that ran automatic responses had temporarily gone offline. He just sat there in the quick-stop parking lot under the flickering fluorescent lights with his hands on his wheel, and the specific, nauseating feeling of a man who has just watched the ground open up beneath a position he thought was solid. He replayed it, the way she turned around, the way she spoke, not loud, not aggressive, not any of the things he had unconsciously braced for, just precise, surgical. Every word she said placed exactly where it would do the most work. The way she announced she was reaching into her jacket, the way she held the badge, not triumphant, not theatrical, just steady, letting it speak. FBI, 22 years. He had pulled his weapon hand on a 22-year federal agent. He finally reached for his radio, reported back to dispatch that the motorcycle situation had been resolved. No incident. When the dispatcher asked for clarification, he said it again. Resolved. No incident. And he drove out of the lot without buying the coffee he had originally pulled in for. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known sitting in that cruiser running the math on how bad this was that 3 separate recordings of the encounter were already moving through the architecture of the internet, with the unstoppable momentum of something that has found exactly the audience it was looking for. The teenager at Pump 5 had posted his clip within 4 minutes of Renee riding away. A woman who had been sitting in her car near the entrance had captured the entire exchange from a different angle. The attendant behind the glass had gotten most of it on his phone through the window, and his version, slightly blurred, slightly tilted, but capturing Pruitt's face in the moment the badge came out with devastating clarity, was the one that would eventually crack 2 million views. By the time Pruitt got home that night, his name was already in comment sections. By the time he woke up the next morning, it was in headlines. His department became aware of the situation at 11:47 p.m., when a sergeant doing a routine social media check flagged the climbing video to the duty supervisor. Within the hour, a chain of notifications was moving up through the department's command structure with the quiet urgency of an organization that has realized it is already behind the story. The chief of police was reached by phone before midnight. His first question was whether the interaction had been recorded on the officer's body camera. It had not. Pruitt's body camera had malfunctioned at the start of his shift, a fact that was logged in the system and therefore verifiable, but which, given the circumstances, was going to read to every person who heard it as exactly the kind of convenient equipment failure that convenient equipment failures always read as. The department's public information officer was up before 6 the next morning drafting the statement that would be released by 9. It went through 4 revisions. The first draft used the word misunderstanding. Someone removed it in the second draft. The third draft included a line about Officer Pruitt's otherwise exemplary record. Someone removed that too. The final version that went out was stripped down to almost nothing, an acknowledgement that an interaction had taken place, a confirmation that an internal review had been initiated, a commitment to taking all allegations of racially biased conduct seriously. It was the linguistic equivalent of a corporation's non-apology apology. It said everything it needed to say to demonstrate awareness of the situation while committing to absolutely nothing. Renee read the statement at her kitchen table over coffee. She read it once. She set her phone down. She finished her coffee. She was not surprised by a single word of it, which was itself a kind of commentary on 22 years of watching institutions manage their own exposure. What surprised her, genuinely, in a way she hadn't quite prepared for, was the volume. Her phone had been ringing since 6 a.m. Colleagues from the field office, former partners, agents she hadn't spoken to in years who had seen the video and were calling to say what people call to say when something like this happens to someone they respect. Her supervisor, assistant special agent in charge Marcus Webb, called at 7:15. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Not how are you handling this, not what do you need from us, just how are you doing in the tone of someone who actually wanted to know." "I'm fine," she said. "I've been fine since I rode out of that parking lot." "I know you have," he said. "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for a moment. Outside her kitchen window the morning was doing what mornings do, indifferent to everything the night had deposited. A neighbor walked a dog. A car backed out of a driveway, the world proceeding at its regular pace. "I'm tired," she said finally. "Not from this. Just tired of this being a thing that keeps happening." Webb was quiet. He understood what she meant. He was a black man who had spent 25 years in federal law enforcement. He had his own version of tired. "The bureau is behind you," he said, "all the way." "I know," she said. "I'll be in by 9. She was in by 8:45. The field office that morning had the particular charged atmosphere of a place where everyone knows something significant has happened and is trying to calibrate how much of that significance to acknowledge out loud. People looked at her quickly, carefully, the way people look when they want to express something they haven't found words for yet. A junior agent named Kowalski, 28 years old and 3 months into his first posting, stopped her in the hallway outside the bullpen. "Agent Carter," he said. He looked like he was about to say something he had been rehearsing. What you did last night, staying that calm, handling it that way, that was. I did what the situation required, she said, not dismissively, gently. That's all any of us can do. He nodded. He looked like he understood something he hadn't understood before. She kept walking. She had a full caseload and no intention of letting the previous night become the reason she fell behind on any of it. But the morning had other plans. By 10 a.m., 3 national media outlets had called the Bureau's press office requesting comment from Agent Carter directly. By 11, a congressman's office had called, a representative who sat on the House Judiciary Committee and who had been looking for a clean, specific, camera-ready example of racially biased policing to anchor a piece of proposed legislation he was preparing to introduce. By noon, a literary agent had somehow gotten her bureau email address and sent a message about a potential book deal that she deleted without finishing. The attention was enormous and largely unwanted, and also, she understood, a resource. She had been in the bureau long enough to know how public moments like this worked. They had a window, a specific pressurized period during which the people with the power to change things were temporarily more motivated to change them than they would be in 6 months when the news cycle had moved on. She had watched that window open and close before without anyone climbing through it. She had watched good cases get lost in the machinery of institutional self-protection, while the moment that could have forced real movement quietly expired. She was not going to let that happen this time, but she was going to be strategic about it. Meanwhile, across the city, Dale Prout was having a morning of a completely different character. He had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the internal investigation. A phone call from his lieutenant that lasted 4 minutes and left him sitting at his kitchen table with the particular hollow feeling of someone who has had a version of their future quietly removed. His wife, Sandra, had watched the video the night before without saying much. She'd gone to bed before he came home. That morning she made coffee and put a cup in front of him and sat across from him and waited. "I thought," he started. "I know what you thought," she said. Her voice wasn't hard. It was something worse. It was careful, like she was handling something fragile that had already cracked. "That's the problem, Dale." He opened his mouth. He closed it. Because the thing he wanted to say, the defense he had been building in his head since the parking lot, the narrative about stolen vehicle reports and procedure, and the difficulty of split-second decisions, collapsed every time he reached for it. Not because he was a stupid man, but because on some level below the defensive instinct, below the self-protective rationalizing, he knew. He had looked across that lot and he had seen what he expected to see, and he had not for 1 second before walking over, asked himself whether his expectations were the problem. That was the thing the statement from his department would never say. That was the thing the internal investigation would phrase in bureaucratic language that drained it of its actual meaning. What happened in that parking lot wasn't a procedural failure. It wasn't a training gap. It wasn't a communication breakdown. It was the straightforward, undiluted result of a man looking at a black woman and reaching a conclusion that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with a bias, so embedded he didn't experience it as bias. He experienced it as instinct. And his instinct had walked him up to a 22-year FBI agent and told her to step away from her own motorcycle. Sandra refilled her coffee. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He didn't have an answer, not a real one. The real answer was complicated and uncomfortable and required him to look at things about himself that he had spent 11 years not looking at, and that kind of looking doesn't happen at a kitchen table the morning after, if it happens at all. Back at the field office, Renee sat in a case review meeting at 2 in the afternoon and was, for 90 minutes, simply an agent working her caseload. Focused, sharp, asking the right questions, contributing the kind of analysis that had made her the agent she was. And for those 90 minutes the parking lot receded, not disappeared. It never fully disappeared, but receded to the place where she had learned to put things that needed processing without letting the processing interfere with the work. After the meeting, her supervisor Webb stopped her outside his office. "Congressman Harris's office called again," he said. "The legislation thing." "I heard. It's not nothing, Renee. I know it's not nothing. He wants to use your incident as the centerpiece of the bill. Mandatory de-escalation requirements, revised stop and identify protocols, independent review boards for bias complaints." She leaned against the wall. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. She thought about her father in the front yard, making himself smaller. She thought about every young agent she had mentored who had come to her with a version of the same story, wearing a different uniform in a different city, but the same story. She thought about the women who had stood in the same parking lot she had stood in and didn't have a badge to reach for. "Set up the call," she said. Webb nodded. He started to turn away. She stopped him. "Marcus," she said. He turned back. "The women who don't have badges, whatever comes out of this, that has to be part of the conversation, not a footnote, the center of it." He held her gaze. He nodded once slowly, the nod of someone who understands that they have just been given not a request but a condition. "Understood," he said. She went back to her desk. She had 3 active cases and a stack of reports and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. She put the phone face down. She opened the first case file. She got back to work. But the storm outside was just getting started. And what was coming next? What Pruitt's department was about to do? What the recording would reveal that the public hadn't seen yet? And what Renee was about to discover about the original stolen motorcycle report that started the whole thing was going to take this story somewhere nobody was ready for. Stay right there. The last piece of this is the one that changes everything. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is different. Subscribe so you never miss what we put out, and leave a comment telling us, do you think institutions like Pruitt's department ever truly change, or does it take moments exactly like this one to force their hand? We want to hear from you. The detail that broke everything open came from an unlikely place. A paralegal named Desiree Fontaine, 24 years old, working late on a Wednesday night in a law office 3 blocks from the Quick Stop, had been watching the video on her phone during a coffee break when something snagged her attention. Not the badge reveal, not Pruitt's face in the moment the badge came out. Something earlier. Something in the background of the attendant's version. The slightly blurred, slightly tilted one shot through the gas station window that most of the 2 million people who had watched it had scrolled past without registering. In the corner of the frame, visible for approximately 4 seconds before the camera angle shifted, was Pruitt's cruiser. And on the laptop mounted to his dashboard, the mobile data terminal that every officer in the Mercer City PD used to run plates and check reports. The screen was clearly, unmistakably dark. He hadn't run anything. Not before he got out. Not while he was walking across the lot. The screen was dark because the terminal was inactive, because Dale Pruitt had not entered a single query before he approached Renee Carter and accused her of stealing her own motorcycle. Desiree posted about it at 11:23 p.m. By morning it was the detail every outlet was leading with. By afternoon it had been confirmed by 2 independent digital forensics analysts who had examined the original video files. The dark terminal, the inactive screen, the proof, sitting in the corner of a slightly blurred frame, that the stop had not been procedurally initiated. It had been instinctively initiated. He had seen her and he had moved. The Mercer City Police Department, which had spent 48 hours carefully managing its exposure with procedural language and institutional caution, suddenly found itself managing something much larger. Because a stolen vehicle report exists in the system. It can be checked. It can be verified. And when journalists started pulling the original report that Pruitt had cited, the black and chrome motorcycle reported stolen from a dealership 2 counties over, they found something that made the dark terminal look like a minor detail by comparison. The report had been closed. 14 hours before Pruitt pulled into the Quick Stop, The motorcycle in question had been located at a storage facility in a neighboring county, confirmed as recovered, and the case had been marked resolved in the department's shared database. Every officer on shift had access to that update. Every mobile terminal and every cruiser automatically synced with the database at the start of each shift. Dale Pruitt's terminal had synced at 6:02 p.m. He had pulled into the quick stop at 7:43 p.m. The case he cited as the basis for his stop had been closed for 14 hours. The motorcycle he claimed to be looking for had already been found. He hadn't been responding to an active report. He had been responding to something else entirely. Something that lived not in a database but in the set of assumptions he carried with him into every shift, onto every street, up to every pump in every parking lot where a black woman was doing something as unremarkable as filling her tank. When this information surfaced publicly, first in a piece by an investigative journalist who had been working the story since the video went viral, then confirmed by two sources inside the department itself, the carefully worded statement the department had released 2 days earlier became, overnight, a document that raised more questions than it answered. The internal review that had been described as a standard procedural response was now being described by the city council member who represented the district where the quick stop sat as a cover-up waiting to happen. The chief of police called a press conference. He stood at a podium in the department's briefing room in front of a row of flags, and he said the words that institutional leaders say when they have run out of room to manage a story from the side. He said that the findings were deeply troubling. He said that the department held its officers to the highest standards of conduct. He said that Officer Pruitt's administrative leave would be extended pending a more thorough investigation, and that an independent review board had been requested. He said that the department was committed to rebuilding trust with all members of the community it served. A reporter in the second row raised her hand. "Chief, are you saying that Officer Pruitt had no valid basis for the stop at all?" The chief paused. In that pause lived every conversation his legal team had had with him in the 4 hours before the press conference. "I'm saying that the investigation will determine the full facts of the situation." But the report he cited was closed 14 hours earlier. He had access to that information. Does the department believe he was aware the case was closed? Another pause, longer this time. That is one of the questions the investigation will address. Renee watched the press conference from her office on a laptop with the volume low. She watched the chief's face during the pauses, the specific micro-expressions of an institution calculating, in real time, how much truth it could afford. She had seen that face before. She had seen it in depositions and hearings and the quiet aftermath of cases that should have gone further than they did. She knew what came after that face. She knew the shape of what the investigation would produce, the language it would use, the conclusions it would reach that managed accountability without actually delivering it. She wasn't going to wait for it. 3 days after the press conference, she sat down with Congressman Harris's chief of staff in a conference room at the field office. She had prepared for this meeting the way she prepared for everything, thoroughly, specifically, with a clear understanding of what she wanted to walk out with. She brought documentation, not of her own incident that was already public, but of a pattern. 47 cases she had personally compiled over 3 weeks of evenings and weekends, pulled from public records, court documents, and incident reports across 6 jurisdictions. 47 stops, accusations, detentions, and escalations involving black women in public spaces, every one of them bearing the structural fingerprint of what had happened to her at the quick stop. Different cities, different officers, different circumstances. The same underlying architecture. She laid the documentation on the table. "I don't want my name attached to legislation that treats what happened to me as an isolated incident," she said, "because it isn't one. It never was." The chief of staff, a methodical woman named Patricia Huang, who had worked in policy for 15 years, and had a reputation for not being moved by things that were only emotionally compelling, looked at the documentation. She turned pages slowly. She did not look up for a long time. When she did, she said, "How long did it take you to compile this?" 3 weeks, evenings and weekends. You were working full caseload at the same time. Yes. Huang looked at the documentation again, then at Renee. This is comprehensive. It needs to be, Renee said, because the moment this is framed as one agent's bad night at a gas station, it becomes a story about an exception. And it's not an exception. It's a pattern wearing a badge. The legislation that eventually emerged, the Equitable Policing Standards Act, introduced 6 weeks later, was built around 4 pillars. Mandatory verification of active reports before initiating any vehicle or pedestrian stop. Independent review boards in every jurisdiction with binding authority over bias complaint investigations, not advisory authority. Revised stop and identify protocols that require documented reasonable suspicion rather than officer discretion. And a national reporting database for racially motivated stops that would make the kind of pattern Renee had documented not just visible but actionable. The bill carried Renee's incident as its public face, but inside the bill, in the language of its findings section, were 47 other cases. 47 women who had stood their ground in parking lots and store aisles and street corners and had not had a badge to produce. 47 encounters that had ended differently, with handcuffs, with charges that were later dropped, with the kind of public humiliation that doesn't go viral because it doesn't have a satisfying reversal, because sometimes the story just ends with the system winning, and the woman going home shaking and nothing changing. Renee had put them in the bill. She had insisted on it. They were in there. Dale Prout resigned from the Mercer City Police Department 9 weeks after the incident. He did not hold a press conference. He did not release a statement through a lawyer. The department confirmed the resignation in 4 sentences and offered no further comment. Whatever conversation he had with himself between that kitchen table the morning after and the day he turned in his badge, whatever reckoning happened or didn't happen in the privacy of his own conscience, was not public record and never would be. Renee did not track it. She had learned early in her career that waiting for the people who wrong you to arrive at accountability on their own timeline was a way of handing them your peace. She had not handed him her peace. She had never come close. What she kept thinking about, in the weeks and months after, in the quiet moments between case reviews and briefings, and the slow institutional grind of trying to turn a piece of legislation into actual law, was the teenager at Pump 5. The one who had posted the first clip. She had never met him. She knew his first name from news coverage, Jalen, 17 years old, a junior at Mercer City High School who had been on his way home from a shift at his after-school job when he stopped to fill up his mother's car. He had seen what was happening, and he had done the thing that mattered most in that moment. He had recorded it. He had posted it. He had made it impossible to disappear. She thought about what it meant that a 17-year-old boy already knew, without being taught it explicitly, without anyone sitting him down and explaining the mechanics of accountability in the age of documentation, that the most powerful thing he could do in that moment was point his phone and press record, that he already carried that knowledge, that he already understood at 17 that visibility was protection, that evidence was armor, that the difference between a story that changes something and a story that disappears was often nothing more than whether someone had been watching. She wrote him a letter, handwritten, on plain paper from her personally. She thanked him not for recording her specifically, but for understanding instinctively that the truth needed a witness. She told him that what he did mattered. She told him that the bill going through Congress had his 4 seconds of slightly blurred footage as one of its foundational pieces of evidence. She told him that the dark terminal in the corner of his frame had changed the entire legal and legislative shape of what the incident could accomplish. She didn't know if the letter would mean anything to him. She sent it anyway. On a Thursday morning 4 months after the quick stop, Renee Carter walked into a Senate committee hearing room in Washington and sat at the witness table. She was in her bureau credentials, formal, composed, the way she was always composed, not because she didn't feel the weight of what she was carrying into that room, but because she had learned 22 years ago that composure was not the absence of feeling. It was the decision to let what you feel make you precise rather than loud. She gave her testimony. She laid out the incident. She walked through the 47 cases. She described what systematic bias looked like, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived architecture. The specific, repeated, daily experience of moving through institutions that claim to serve everyone while structurally protecting some people from the full cost of their own assumptions. She was asked, near the end of her testimony, by a senator from a southern state who had the particular energy of someone who had come to the hearing looking for a way to make the complexity smaller than it was. She was asked whether she thought Officer Pruitt was a racist. She looked at him, she took her time. I think the question of what lives in Officer Pruitt's heart is less important than the question of what the system permitted him to do, she said. A good system catches a bad actor. A broken system doesn't need bad actors. It just needs ordinary ones operating on unchecked assumptions. What happened to me at that gas station didn't require a monster. It required an institution that had never made the cost of that kind of mistake high enough to stop it from happening. The senator had no follow-up question. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has been said that reframes the entire conversation, and everyone in the room knows it. Renee gathered her documents. She straightened her jacket. She stood up from the witness table the way she had stood up from every table in every room in 22 years, like she had every right to be there, like the room had been built for people exactly like her, like there was no version of this story in which she did not belong. She walked out of the hearing room, down the marble corridor, through the tall doors and into the pale morning light. She had a flight home at 3. She had 3 active cases waiting on her desk. She had a motorcycle in her garage with a full tank of gas and 40 minutes of open highway between her and her front door. She put on her sunglasses. She kept walking, because that's what she had always done, what she would always do, not because the road ahead was easy, it wasn't. Not because the system had finally decided to deserve her, it hadn't, not fully, not yet, but because stopping had never been an option she was willing to consider. Because her father had stood in a front yard and made himself smaller and she had watched it happen and decided, at 7 years old, that she would spend her life making the world the kind of place where that particular shrinking, that practiced, exhausted, survival instinct shrinking, would one day no longer be necessary. She wasn't there yet. Nobody was. But she was moving toward it with the same composure, the same precision, the same stubborn and clear-eyed faith that had carried her from Delmont Street to Quantico to 22 years of closed cases and open roads. And somewhere across the city, a 17-year-old boy named Jalen opened a hand-written letter and read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it somewhere he would keep it. Some things deserve to be witnessed. Some things deserve to last. This was one of them. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, think something, see something differently, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. These are the stories that need to be told all the way through. Not the 2-minute version, not the headline, the whole thing. Subscribe if you haven't already, because every week we go this deep on stories that the news cycle moves past too fast. And leave a comment right now. What part of Renee's story hit you the hardest? Was it the parking lot? Her father in the front yard? The 47 women in the bill? Tell us. Because your response to this story is part of the story. We'll see you in the next one.